and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to The Future is Female. This is the show where we find the extraordinary in every woman. I'm here at Khazanah Megatrends Forum 2025 with one of the speakers at the event today, Dr. Alaa Murabit, who is a medical doctor and a movement builder. And because of this, she was appointed by the UN Secretary General to be a Sustainable Development Goals advocate. She also currently serves as Managing Partner for Sustainable Growth at 500 Global. I'm honored to welcome her on the show. Hello, Dr. Alaa. Welcome to the show.
How are you?
Well, thank you. So I think many of our viewers today will be meeting you for the first time. And I want to say that you have worked in war zones, you've spoken to global leaders, you've sat at negotiating tables in the UN. If you were to introduce yourself to the audience today through a single story, one that represents the work that you do, why you do the work that you do, what would it be?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
Oh,
I think I would actually start with, I am the middle child of 11 brothers and sisters. Perfect middle, 5 older, 5 younger.
Wow.
And for me, actually, I would probably take them back to arguably our dining table when we were growing up. My parents had immigrated to Canada. They're originally from Libya, North Africa, and I spent the first 14 years of my life being raised in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and then moved when I was 15 back to Libya when I had finished high school. So I would probably take them actually to our dining room table because I think there's so much that you learn about a person, about the world. And I think for me, everything I've learned about diplomacy and politics and rights and humanity has been a consequence of being one of 11 children in an immigrant family, and has been a consequence of the way my parents taught us to negotiate and debate about everything from faith to politics to social norms. And I took so much of that with me into medical school. It was what really convinced me that my calling was to be a physician. And then in my final year of medical school, so much of that really kind of encouraged me, convinced me to create a women's rights organization in the middle of a war. And so I think I would really take them back to the foundation. So often we go to the moment when you put all of those lessons and learnings into action.
When it clicks,
When it clicks. And I think there's so much more to be said about when you're building so much of that identity and so much of that value system that drives you into these spaces, because everything I've done since has been a consequence.
Talk to me about that. So you mentioned building, creating a women's rights group in the middle of the war. You were so young when you started it. You were 21. Yeah. I think about all the things that I didn't do in my 20s, and I'm in awe of that. Such a remarkable thing. Did you know when you were creating it what it would eventually become? Talk to me about the idea of creating it. What you wanted to do, and now in hindsight, when you think about what it has become, what are the lessons that you've learned?
Well, I think age is such an interesting thing, because I think I had the benefit of what I now call the arrogance of youth. There's a level of
relate.
You know what I mean? You're naive, but in like you're
so confident.
You're so confident. You're like, you know what? These people, they just don't have the information. If I just give them the information, if just I show up, there's a definitely an element of like, well, they just don't have the data. So if we show them the data, things will change. And so when I started the organization, the focus really was on how do we present these solutions in a compelling way to political leaders and to an emerging political class, emerging political movements that we had not yet had. And in the beginning, the organization was fundamentally focused on women, peace, and security, on really engaging given the context of conflict, and then over time expanded to really be looking at, okay, what are economic labor policies that could support women? What would a women's charter look like in a constitution? And really took that role on. But I will say, it was really born out of a belief that every single person has the capacity and the capability to change outcomes if they engage. And I think I felt that so strongly at 21. And I hadn't found the vehicle in front of me, so it was, I needed to create the vehicle.
So you created it because it was a gap that you saw.
It's a gap that I saw, and it's the same thing can be said for everything from the Sustainable Development Goals to the work I do today at 500 Global. In almost every space that I've worked, it's been what is the reality we're looking at? What are who is missing from this room, and how do we bring them in? What are the gaps we're seeing, and then how do we build to be able to actually create tools and systems that are more fit for purpose in the moment of time we're in?
Could I get you to unpack that? Because I think there are a lot of people today who feel very strongly about justice, about equality, but they struggle to turn that into that conviction into meaningful change, into real concrete action. So when you did it, especially in one of the most difficult contexts in the middle of the a civil war, how did you do that? Talk to me a little bit about moving from an idea to building a movement that people can get behind, can take seriously, and can affect change eventually.
I have a couple of answers to that. One, I'll start with first answering the question directly, but then I really want to talk about how we define leadership, because I think it's also very important. In my instance in particular, and I think in most successful movement builders, I think recognizing that people are also experiencing what you're talking about is critically important. You're not just solving a challenge for yourself. There is a collective behind it. That's the point of a movement. It's never one singular person. There were so many incredible organizations that were working in this space, and the reason we actually did something called the One Voice Conference was to be able to bring them together to say, okay, can we coalesce around a movement, right? And it's recognizing that so many people need to see themselves in what you're trying to build, and need to see the challenges, and need to feel like they are architects in the solutions. And so that was very important to me very early on. I think the second thing is conviction is a very powerful thing. And when you see someone who is fully convinced that they can make change, you believe in your own agency a bit more. And so I do think that kind of arrogance of youth was really compelling. People are like, wait, if she thinks this is doable, then it probably is, maybe. She seems intelligent enough. And so you are able to bring in people from a vision, an idea, something that feels compelling, feels actionable, it feels, like they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So that was critically important. And the third thing connects me to kind of how we define leadership, which is, I think there are so many people around the world who are so justice-oriented. It is one of the most exciting things to see at a time when a lot of our politics can be really disappointing globally. It's exciting to see people out in the millions, marching, demanding justice, demanding equity, demanding rights. And I think we underestimate the power of doing that in your local community. So VLW really started in my local city. It wasn't the capital, it was my community, it was people I knew, it was my university, and it expanded from there. And I think we need to give more credit and respect and space to people who in their own workplace, in their own family, in their own religious community, in their own sphere of power are saying, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with something, I'm going to demand change. Because that's how it starts. Not everybody is going to go from day one to a global movement. I didn't, right? I think when we see something in our own lives and we say, you know what, I'm going to demand better, and I'm going to influence my sphere of power. I'm going to put my reputation, my networks, my credibility on the line for this to be able to drive change in my community where my voice can hold the most power. I think from that, the most change happens around the world.
That's so inspiring, but I think for many people today, and especially today, I want to note that Gaza is top of mind. So with your work, having worked in conflict zones, trying to protect people from the impact and repercussions of conflict, when you look at what's happening in Gaza today, the suffering of women, children, entire families, what strikes you the most about the way the world is responding?
Oh, the absolute failure of leadership. I think for a very long time, and I have been part of the belief that we have a core understanding of human value. And my mission in life, regardless of whichever platform I am working through, is that every person has the right to a dignified life, and no child should die of preventable causes. And I understood that to be the hallmark of human rights values. Many of us who come from countries in what is called the Global South are often told that, these are human rights values, these are important international values. And I think it has been a glaring education for so many people about the lack of moral consistency and the lack of moral leadership and the illusion of values that drive so many of our international platforms. For me, it's been an incredibly interesting education, not one that has been surprising, but has been shocking, if that makes sense, and one that feels like it has shifted a lot of our, rightly shifted a lot of the global conversations around everything from human rights to sustainable growth to development to equity and opportunity, and I think it should. And I will say one of the things that is, I hope, a silver lining, and that sounds awful to say, but is that many countries like Libya, like Malaysia, are starting to look at their role in the world and say, actually, we are going to define this differently, and we are going to be assertive in our belief that human rights matters. I mean, seeing South Africa stand up and the ICJ is an excellent example of that, to say we're going to lever some of these international forums to actually demand the equity that the human rights that they are supposedly built on. And I think that's been exciting to see.
It has been a almost pivotal point in the way the world has seen the rules of the world, the rules-based order. Can I ask you, in terms
whose rules?
Whose rules, and who's playing by those rules, and whose rules apply to whom?
Exactly.
Can I ask you, Dr. Alaa, when you think about the role of women in peace and security, in the current setting of the global power dynamics, women are often left out from those decisions. You've made it your life mission to make sure that women are at the table. When we think about what that looks like, could you paint a picture for us? For those of us who are not in the room when those decisions are being made, what does real inclusion look like, taking into account the role of women in peace building?
So back in the year 2000, there was a resolution called Women, Peace and Security, and it was really born out of the recognition, Resolution 1325. It was born out of the recognition that 90% of our peace processes fail within 5 years. And if you imagine the implications that has, that means that you are likely to go back into conflict. You are not building out infrastructure, education stalls again, healthcare stalls again. And what we found was, with the inclusion of women at the agenda-setting phase, to really talk about, okay, what are the things that need to be demanded of most? It's not simply reparations, it's also education. It's not just having an inclusive security process. Meant that we were 35 times more likely to have those same processes last 15 years, which is huge impact. 35 times, a huge impact on education, on healthcare, on economic development and opportunity. And I think that that's very telling. And it's not, some people sometimes tell me, like, okay, well, if we just had women everywhere, then there would be peace. And I'm like, that's not the argument, actually. The argument is for inclusion. What you want is a representative body. And because conflict isn't just born out of those with guns, right? Conflict is born out of a collective. And if you only have a certain group sitting at the table, once their needs are met, they leave the table. But once they realize that actually they're not getting the same benefit that they once got in conflict, they want to go back, right? And so you find that the people who have the most to lose are the ones who are most necessary at the table, and to your point, that's most often women and children. So really having civil society, having women, ultimately changes the trajectory of peace processes. It means that more people are staying in school, more people are gaining employment, more people are seeing the potential for a conflict-free society and able to build the resilience that they need over time.
The evidence is remarkable to think that. I mean,
you can see why at 21 I was like, we just need to tell people the evidence.
Anecdotally, you think it's true, but clearly the evidence has.
The evidence is really compelling.
So I have to say that I watched your TED Talk in 2015, years ago, and it really moved me and changed me personally as a journalist. And I was so excited to hear that you would be in town today, and I wanted to jump on the opportunity to speak to you here at the forum. Looking back at your TED Talk now, I'm just wondering if you could assess, in the decade since, where I would encourage everyone to go and watch Dr. Alaa's TED Talk. I think it's the title is, if I'm getting it correctly, What My Religion Says About Women. And it was profoundly moving for me. In the 10 years that it's been out there, being viral, what has been the impact to you? Have people come up to you and talked to you about it? Have you seen change and progress because of the words you've put out there?
People do come up and talk to me about it. It's actually one of the most kind of sustained discussions I have. I think some come up and want to challenge the notion that religion can be leveraged for good. I often dispute that by saying anything that can be leveraged for negative can usually also be leveraged for good. We just need to be able to engage with it in the most accurate way or in the most effective way. Some often tell me, hey, it's giving greater power to religious leadership. And I say, in many contexts, religious leadership doesn't need to be given greater power. It's actually rights movements that do. Some come up and tell me it's profoundly changed their understanding of how they engage with their own faith community, and that's across faiths, and how they could engage with it differently to advance some of their rights missions. And so I think in the 10 years since, I only feel more strongly that religion is really one of the most effective social organizing and kind of communities that people congregate around, identify with, define their life values and their life mission from. And I think that that's critically important for us to not only be able to recognize, but then to say, how do we ensure that religion, this incredibly powerful force, is one that uplifts and motivates and demands the equity that I think so many of us believe our faiths demand.
It really spoke to me, sorry to interrupt, it really spoke to me about reclaiming women's leadership from within my faith. Yeah. I'm Muslim as well. When you look at the world now, do you think that reclamation is happening bit by bit? Are we progressing towards that?
It's so interesting you asked that. So I have actually I have an op-ed coming out in the New York Times in December. It's part of their Turning Point series, and it really focuses on kind of what you think is happening in the world. And I point to what is resurgence of faith. In a time of AI and automation, and more people are reclaiming, for the first time in decades, a decrease in faith has stagnated, and the younger population is actually increasing what they're calling in their spirituality or religious identity. And I think that's so interesting, because I think people are seeking and looking for community. I think people are seeking and looking for purpose and for agency. And it is one of the historically most effective ways in which people seek that out. So this reconnection to some form of divine. And I think it's particularly interesting when you think about global norm setting and policy. A lot of our countries say that they are secular states, and yet most of their laws are still anchored in some faith. And so faith continues to be a defining function of our norms, of our institutions. And I think re-entering the conversation to say, okay, has that influence? How effective has it been? Which, has it really been a representative interpretation? All of those are very fair things. And I'm excited to see more young people, more women come into the conversation and say, actually, wait, I don't understand. Where is that interpretation? This interpretation has been solely defined by those who identify in likeness. And so I'd like to understand that. I'd like to get a little bit more framing on that. Seeing more women enter official religious education and really kind of increase their influence and voice there has been really exciting.
I can't wait for your op-ed to come out, then for me to read it. In summary, I want to ask you maybe a message of hope, or what keeps you going, especially in times like these where, as Khazanah Megatrends, the theme is the uncertainty, an age of uncertainty. When you think about how you have seen maybe the worst of humanity even, what keeps you going? What keeps you hopeful? You've seen the worst, but I'm sure you've also seen it at its best.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
When I was younger, my dad's a physician, and when I was younger, as I mentioned, I had a lot of siblings. So I would often go after school to the hospital. And I knew I wanted to be a doctor from, I would say, when I was 5 years old. Because I would go to the hospital, and I would argue that a hospital has seen more prayers than any mosque, church, or synagogue. People are at their absolute most human in a hospital. And I felt so strongly that that was a calling, to be part of a community that's sole mission is to save lives, is to prevent pain and suffering, felt really aligned mainly with my faith beliefs, actually, that this was a calling. And so I think that gives me hope. This idea that we're all put on this earth, I think, for a finite period of time, and nothing is going to get solved in our time. I mean, it's also something I learned from my faith. You know, the Prophet ﷺ, in his time, there were these challenges. And if the prophets and the Sahaba were not able to individually solve them, I think we should enter spaces with humility and say, I might not individually be able to solve this. A lot of these challenges will still exist when I'm gone. But inshallah, I move the needle. Hopefully I do my part and I leave the world a little bit better than I found it. And so for me, that keeps me going, that there is a level of humility. So much of this is not in my hands. But what is how I show up in the world and what I leave behind and what I leave for others. And hopefully I have done my part and others do theirs. And I think ultimately that will lead us into a much more equitable, much more fair, much more respectful place for all.
You've given me hope. It's been such a joy talking to you. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
Dr.
Thank you so much for having me. No, thank you so much for having me.
That's all the time we have for you on this episode of The Future is Female. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.